My parents let my stepbrother ruin my life. I never thought of myself as someone who could hate a child. But that was before I met Wesley. I was 14 when my dad married his second wife. I remember the courthouse steps because they were cracked and uneven, and my heel caught in one of them as we walked out. It felt symbolic. Even then, my stepmother came with a 5-year-old son. That number followed Wesley everywhere like a shield. 5 years old meant clumsy hands, accidents, and innocence. Even when innocence didn't quite fit anymore. Our new house was bigger than the apartment Dad and I had lived in. But somehow, it felt smaller the moment Wesley moved in. My room shrank first, not physically, but in every way that mattered. My door stopped being a boundary, my desk stopped being a place where things stayed how I left them, and my bed stopped feeling like mine. The first thing that went missing was a necklace my mother had given me before she passed. I kept it in the top drawer of my dresser, tucked into a sock so it wouldn't scratch. One day the drawer was open and the sock was gone. I didn't accuse anyone. I just asked if anyone had seen it. Wesley was wearing it. The chain was stretched awkwardly around his neck, and he was spinning it between his fingers, letting the pendant smack into his chest over and over. I remember how quiet the room got. Not tense, but quiet in that way where adults decide something before you're allowed to speak. He cried when they took it off him like his heart was breaking. I didn't cry when the chain came back bent and warped beyond fixing. I learned something that day. Crying wasn't about pain. It was about power. That incident was just the beginning. From then on, my things became temporary. Books had torn pages, clothes came back stained or shrunk, and school supplies got snapped in half. Anything I loved became something Wesley wanted, and anything Wesley wanted eventually became his. If I complained, I was told to be understanding. If I pushed back, I was told to be mature. If I got upset, I was told I was jealous. Wesley was still adjusting. Wesley was just a kid. Wesley didn't know any better. I knew better than to leave anything out. I knew better than to lock my door because that made me unwelcoming. I knew better than to ask why my stepmother never corrected him, because that led to lectures about blending families and sacrifices. It was exhausting. The age gap made it worse. 9 years between us meant everything he did was minimized and everything I did was magnified. When he spilled juice on my laptop, it was an accident, but when I sighed too loudly, it was an attitude problem. When he pushed my chair out from under me and I hit the floor, it was horseplay. But when I stopped eating dinner at the table, it was disrespect. My dad changed too. He didn't yell or get physical. He just stopped seeing anything. He looked through me like I was part of the furniture or something that came with the house but didn't require attention. The first time I realized Wesley enjoyed it was the day he smiled at me while my stepmother was lecturing me. He just watched calmly, like someone who already knew how the story ended. By the time Wesley turned 8, I understood the rules of the house better than anyone else. Rule 1. Whoever told the story first controlled it. Rule 2. Tears mattered more than facts. Rule 3. Age decided guilt. Wesley mastered those rules with terrifying precision. He learned how to hurt me without leaving marks. He learned how to ruin things in ways that looked like accidents. He learned exactly how loud to cry and exactly when to stop. And most importantly, he learned how to wait until no one was watching. If something broke, it was because I left it out. If something went missing, it was because I misplaced it. If something spilled, it was because I startled him. He once deleted an entire semester's worth of schoolwork off my computer. I found the recycle bin empty and the files gone. When I brought it up, he cried so hard he made himself gag. He told them I had yelled at him and I was grounded for a week. That was when something inside me shifted from hurt to something colder. I stopped trying to explain or expecting fairness. I stopped believing that being good would protect me. High school became my refuge. I stayed late after class, joined clubs I didn't care about, and took the long way home. Anything to be away from the house. Wesley noticed my absence. He didn't like losing access to attention, so he escalated. Things started happening that couldn't be brushed off as clumsiness. My bedroom door was kicked hard enough to crack the frame. My backpack was dumped into the trash. Notes appeared on my desk in handwriting that wasn't mine, saying things I would never say. It was still my fault somehow. I was told I was provoking him by ignoring him. I was told I needed to make more of an effort and family meant compromise. The worst part wasn't the damage or the punishment, it was the isolation. I stopped telling friends what was happening because it sounded exaggerated when I said it out loud. Evil stepbrother felt like a movie trope, not something you admitted to living with. People would just laugh it off and tell me I'd understand. When I was older and I understood perfectly. By the time I turned 17, Wesley had perfected the role of the misunderstood youngest child. Teachers adored him, neighbors praised him, and relatives pinched his cheeks at holidays and told my parents how lucky they were. Meanwhile, no one asked me anything. I was the quiet, difficult one. The girl who always looked tired. The night everything truly broke didn't involve yelling or violence. It didn't even involve Wesley being in the room. I came home to find my suitcase gone. Inside it were the things I'd been quietly preparing for months. Important documents, cash from my part-time job, and the last few things that were unquestionably mine. My stepmother said Wesley must have been playing. My father said it would turn up. Wesley watched from the hallway, expression blank and hands folded behind his back like he was waiting for applause. That was the moment I realized he wasn't just spoiled, he was intentional. And worse than that, he was confident that no matter how far he went, the blame would never land where it belonged. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just went back to my room and added another entry to my ongoing list. Extended family was coming for the holidays, and this time, Wesley wasn't the only audience. The holidays had always been loud before Wesley. Overlapping conversations spilled from the living room into the kitchen and down the hall. Aunts hugged too tightly, and cousins rearranged furniture without asking. Plates were stacked wherever there was space. After Wesley, the holidays became controlled. My stepmother planned everything down to the minute. Seating charts, activity schedules, and rules about what could and couldn't be talked about became the new normal. She said it was to keep things calm for Wesley, who supposedly got overwhelmed easily. What she really meant was predictable. I could feel it weeks in advance that this year was different. The tension sat low in my chest, like my body already knew something important was coming and didn't trust me not to mess it up. My extended family hadn't been around much since my dad remarried, but this year everyone was coming. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins were all celebrating at our house this year. The house was going to be full of people who remembered me before. People who knew my mom. All people Wesley didn't control. The suitcase never turned up and nobody seemed concerned about that except me. My stepmother suggested I must have left it somewhere else. My father said we'd look after the holidays. Wesley stayed very quiet about it, which somehow made it worse. I didn't push. Instead, I prepared. I didn't plan some dramatic reveal or rehearse some speech. I didn't confront anyone. I just made sure I had my phone charged and my notes backed up. I made sure I knew where everything was in the house. I made sure I stayed visible. That last part was important. Wesley thrived in gaps. Empty rooms and moments when adults assumed nothing could possibly go wrong because no one was watching. So I stayed where people were. The first few days went smoothly enough. Wesley played the part of the sweet youngest cousin beautifully. He laughed at the right moments, helped set the table, and even offered to carry plates. Everyone loved him. I watched closely. It started small, the way it always did. A cup tipped over near me, juice spreading across the tablecloth. Wesley apologized quickly, eyes shiny. My stepmother waved it off before anyone could even look at. Later, my phone disappeared for an hour. When it reappeared on the kitchen counter, the screen was cracked. Wesley claimed he'd found it on the floor. I didn't react, which seemed to bother him. He started pushing more, like he was testing how much he could get away with in front of witnesses. He bumped into me in the hallway hard enough that my shoulder hit the wall. He brushed past my chair repeatedly at dinner. He tripped near my open bag, sending its contents scattering. Each time I stayed calm. Each time someone noticed. Not enough to accuse or intervene, but enough to look at me a second longer than usual. The turning point came on the third night guests were here. I had stepped into the guest room to grab extra blankets when I heard the sound behind me. The soft, unmistakable click of the door closing. I turned and saw Wesley standing to the side of the door, hands behind his back again, posture careful and composed. He didn't need to block the door. The moment felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. He reached into his pocket and dropped something onto the bed. My missing necklace. Bent even further than before, the clasp barely hanging on. I didn't say anything. He watched my face closely, waiting for something. Anger, panic, tears, or anything else he could use against me. But when I didn't give it to him, his expression shifted just enough to show irritation. That was when I heard footsteps in the hallway. The door opened and my aunt stood there, arms full of folded laundry, frozen in the doorway. Her eyes went from Wesley to the necklace to me. No one spoke right away. Wesley reacted first. He started crying in a way that was loud and sudden and practiced. He said he'd found the necklace on the floor and wanted to return it. He said I'd scared him by staring at him and he didn't know why I was being so mean. Normally, that would have been enough. But something had changed. My aunt didn't rush to comfort him. She didn't scold me either. She just looked confused. And confusion was dangerous because it left space for questions. Later that night, she asked me quietly if I was okay. I said yes, but I didn't sound convincing. Once a question exists, it's hard to unask it. I saw the confusion spreading. In small ways. Side glances, pauses in conversation, and people noticing things they hadn't before. The way Wesley hovered around me constantly, the way I flinched when something fell, and the way my stepmother corrected me before I'd even spoken. I didn't encourage it. I didn't need to. The house dynamic started telling the story. The bathroom lock that didn't work on my door but worked everywhere else. The bedroom frame with the cracked wood near the hinges. The pile of ruined chargers in my drawer. The backups of schoolwork stored in 3 different places. My grandmother noticed my room first. She commented on how bare it looked and how few personal items I had for someone my age. She asked where my posters went and where my books were. I told her I liked it simple, but she clearly didn't believe me. That evening, Wesley went too far. During dinner with everyone present, he reached across the table and knocked my plate into my lap. Food spilled everywhere and sauce soaked into my clothes. He froze. For a fraction of a second, he didn't know what to do. The move hadn't been subtle enough. There was no plausible accident, so he didn't have an explanation ready. Everyone saw it. The silence was heavy and unfamiliar. Wesley started crying, but he was too late. My stepmother jumped in immediately, saying he must have lost his balance, saying he hadn't slept well and I was sitting too close. No one agreed out loud, but no one nodded either. I stood up, cleaned myself off, and left the table without a word. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from relatives asking if I wanted to talk and if everything was okay. I answered in short but polite texts. I didn't send evidence or accuse anyone. I just told the truth in the smallest possible pieces. The next morning, my suitcase was back in my room, placed neatly at the foot of my bed. That scared me more than its disappearance. It meant someone had told Wesley to fix it. It meant his control over the house was slipping. The final crack came when my cousin found my old phone in Wesley's backpack. The one that had gone missing months earlier. That everyone said I'd lost. There was no good explanation for that. My stepmother tried to laugh it off. She said kids pick things up without thinking and it didn't mean anything. But it meant everything. Suddenly, it wasn't just my word, it was a pattern. People started comparing notes without me even being there. Stories started lining up. And inconsistencies were stacking too high to ignore. Wesley was crying harder than ever, and somehow convincing fewer people each time. I stayed quiet. I let them see for themselves what I had been surviving. By the end of the visit, the house felt different. Like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My parents were tense and defensive. Wesley stopped looking confident. For the first time since he was 5, he looked unsure. And for the first time since I was 14, I felt something like relief. I could hear the family talking. Murmurs behind closed doors led to conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Not because I wasn't allowed to hear them, but because people weren't sure how to include me yet. They were realizing that the version of me they had accepted for years hadn't been accurate. I stayed out of the way as much as possible. Not out of fear, but strategy. I had learned the hard way that being present during confrontations only made it easier for blame to slide back onto me. So, I let my absence do the talking. Extended family started asking practical questions. The kind that didn't feel emotional but carried weight. Where were my legal documents? Why didn't I have copies? Why was my school counselor under the impression I was difficult at home? Why had no one intervened sooner? Each question forced my parents to answer something concrete instead of hiding behind intentions. And it turned out that intentions didn't matter much when stacked against years of neglect. My father struggled the most. Not because he didn't care, but because caring would have required him to admit how thoroughly he had failed. He had outsourced peace to avoidance and called it parenting. Every time Wesley acted out, it had been easier to believe I was exaggerating than to face the reality that his household wasn't fair. My stepmother, on the other hand, fought. She reframed everything and rewrote history in real time. She claimed I had always been sensitive and I had resented Wesley from the beginning. She said the age gap made it impossible for things to be equal. No one argued with her directly. But the evidence existed now, and it spoke without needing to be defended. It showed patterns of how often I had been punished immediately while Wesley had been excused automatically. That difference was impossible to ignore once seen. Wesley reacted badly. He stopped pretending, slammed doors, and refused instructions. He accused relatives of lying, and even tried to corner me when no one was looking, only to freeze when someone entered the room unexpectedly. For the first time, adults noticed his behavior without me needing to point it out. The atmosphere in the house became tense and brittle. My parents watched him constantly now, not with care but with fear. Fear of what else they'd missed and of how bad it might look if things got worse. The real shift happened during a family meeting I wasn't asked to attend. That hurt more than I expected, but later I understood why. They weren't discussing me, but instead my parents, what they had allowed, what they had dismissed, what they had normalized because it was inconvenient to do otherwise. When my grandmother finally came to my room that night, her face looked older than it had a week earlier. She didn't apologize, but she said she wished she'd paid closer attention, and that was enough. By the end of the visit, my living situation had stopped being treated as permanent. Words like temporary arrangement and transition floated through the house. I noticed my stepmother bristling every time they were mentioned. Control was slipping. And without control, everything else followed. Leaving didn't feel dramatic, which surprised me. I had imagined it would feel explosive or triumphant or devastating. Instead, it felt methodical. Like something overdue finally being processed. My aunt and uncle didn't frame it as a rescue. They framed it as a choice where my comfort mattered. The day I moved, the house was quiet. Wesley stayed in his room while my stepmother hovered near the kitchen, reorganizing cabinets that didn't need reorganizing. My father stood in the hallway and watched strangers carry pieces of my life past him. He didn't stop them or help. He just looked small. At my new place, the rules were simple and clear. If something broke, it was fixed. If something went missing, it was looked for without accusation. If I locked my door, no one questioned why. Those things shouldn't have felt revolutionary, but they did. The fallout took time. Without me as a constant comparison point, Wesley's behavior became impossible to redirect. Teachers contacted my parents, relatives stopped making excuses, and family gatherings became awkward because no one wanted to sit next to him anymore. The charm wore off quickly when there was no scapegoat. Therapy started later than it should have. Consequences followed behavior instead of tears. Boundaries existed and were enforced, not because my parents suddenly became perfect, but because too many people were watching now. Reputations had been damaged, and that seemed to matter to them more than anything else. I didn't return to the house often. When I did, it felt unfamiliar. like a place that had relied on imbalance to function and didn't know what to do now that it was gone. At one family gathering months later, I noticed something subtle. No one hovered over Wesley or rushed to defend him. They watched him carefully instead. As for my parents, they tried in small ways. They reached out for awkward check-ins and to offer of help that came too late to feel meaningful. I accepted what felt genuine and ignored what didn't. I didn't need closure from them. I already had it. Closure was watching the story change once it was told correctly. It was seeing how quickly people adjusted when the truth replaced convenience. It was understanding that what happened to me wasn't invisible. It was ignored. And ignored things only stay hidden while silence protects them. I'm older now. I'm independent and stable enough to not flinch when doors close. I don't keep inventory of my belongings out of habit. I don't assume blame is waiting for me around every corner. Wesley still exists, but he no longer defines my life. The house that revolved around him learned the hard way what happens when favoritism replaces responsibility, and I learned something. 2. Sometimes survival isn't about fighting louder. It's about lasting long enough for the truth to outgrow the lies.